Welcome to another FPS tutorial. We're in Godot Engine 4.2 and we're making an FPS step by step. And today we're going to be adding a muzzle flash. And the process is pretty simple. So essentially we're going to be adding a node, a 3D node, right in front of this muzzle in our gun. And within that node, we're going to have a light and we're going to have a GPU particle node. And the light's going to give us that flashing whenever we shoot. And then the particle node is going to give us the flame flare look that comes out of the muzzle of the gun. So we have to do a couple of things within our weapon scene. I've got the weapon script. If you're working from your own, wherever you have your weapon mesh is going to be fine. You're just going to want to put that within that same scene right in front of that muzzle. And as always, everything that I'm making is available as a source file on my Patreon. So you can check that out in the description. All right, so to get started, I'm sitting in my weapon scene. This is where we created the recoil position in the last episode. And we're going to start right here. We're going to add another node 3D into this node. So we're sort of separating out this functionality into different nodes and different scripts and making them independent of everything else. They're not going to be connected all that much within our weapon script. It's a little bit more of a component style setup. So we've got our node 3D, and we're going to call this muzzle flash. And then within this node, we're going to have two child nodes, two children. We're going to have an OmniLight 3D node, and we're going to have a GPU particles 3D node. And don't worry about the little warning sign. We'll get to that in a minute. Now with our two children nodes added, we're going to be adding a script like we did to our recoil position, to our muzzle flash node. And it's going to be specifically just for the muzzle flash. So let's go ahead and add that script. We will put that in our scripts folder, call it muzzle flash, save that, and there we go. Within this script, we're going to do basically one thing. We're going to have a function that tells the node what to do for our muzzle flash, which is going to be to activate the light and to emit our particles. And all it's going to do is connect to our weapon fired, which is happening in our weapon script. It's honestly nice to keep the scripts really simple and have their job be very clear. If they get too many things going on in the script, you get the equivalent of a spaghetti code within Unreal, and it's a little hard to see what's going on when you don't even have the spaghetti lines. So at least within this node, very simple. The first thing we need to do is add some export variables. And the first one, as always, as we're working through our weapon features, is to get a reference to our weapon controller. And then our next one is going to be flash time, which is going to be how long we want the particles and how long we want the light to be flashing. So you can edit that, change it, and you can change that depending on whatever your weapon is too. Next, we need to get references to our OmniLight and to our GPU particle 3D nodes. Now you can do this a couple of different ways. I like to do export variables on these nodes because even if you move the node, it keeps it, and I kind of prefer that. Now if you do an onReady, or you just drag in the variable reference, like if you just drag it in here, if you move that node, your reference is going to be broken because it's not in the same place. So I like to do an export. It's one extra step in the beginning, but then after that, you're good to go. And we'll do another export variable for our emitter, which is going to be a GPU particles. And we don't need to set an equals. And again, I always like to set the type. All right, so we have our export variables, and let's get these set up. So the first one is going to go to our weapon. And because we've set the type, it's the only one that we can pick for that. And for our lights, we select our OmniLight. And for our emitter, we have our GPU particle. And flash time, I've already set a default of 0.05. So we've got our variable set up. The next thing we need to do is create our muzzle flash function. In fact, we're not going to be using our process. We don't need that. So we can delete that. And our muzzle flash function, let's do add muzzle flash. I like having a verb in there because it's doing something, right? So for our muzzle flash, what are we trying to do, right? It's always good to think through what are the steps of what you're trying to do. So the first thing we need is we need to have the light turn on, which means we need to start with the light off. So let's go ahead and click off the visibility. So we need to have the light turn on. So we set that to true. We need to have the emitter turn on. Now we haven't created our particles yet. We'll get to that. And then we're going to wait our flash time, and then we're going to turn the light off again. That's it. That's all we really need to do. So we'll add a reference to our lights. We'll set the visible to our lights to true. And again, why is it important to do your types? Because when you have your types chosen in your variables, you get the autocomplete, and it's a lot easier to work through. So we have our lights set to true. Then we need to get our emitter reference, and we need to set emitting because it's going to be a one shot, and we'll talk about that in a second. We'll set emitting to true, and then await. We're going to create a timer for our flash time. So how you do that? You do await, which is a new thing in Godot 4, get tree. So we're getting the main tree of our scene, and we're going to create timer. And then we set the time in seconds, which will be our flash time. Now, you don't forget, you're not just creating the timer. You got to have something happen, right? We're going to get the signal for timeout. So when that timeout happens, when that signal fires, which is what that await means, we're awaiting for that signal to fire. Then we set our light visible, not visible parent, we don't need that. Visible to flash, to false. Okay, I feel like I need a new keyboard, or maybe it's just me. It's probably just me. All right, light, set the visible, false. We're good. So that's our function. We're done. Next thing we need to do is connect that function to the weapon fired signal that we're doing in our weapon. And I've talked about this in previous episodes. I'll talk about it again. Within the weapon controller script, whenever we're firing our gun, whenever we're clicking on that mouse, we are running a function. And that function is just our attack function. And the first thing that we have in that attack function is to emit weapon fired. And that is a custom signal that we created up here in our script. So every time we fire the gun, that signal fires as well. And that means we can connect a bunch of other things to that signal. And that's the depth of that connection. That's all you have to do. You don't have to put a bunch of stuff in each script to make everything work. You just add a listener, as we did in our recoil. We did a reference, weapon fired, connect, add the callable. We're going to do the same thing in our muzzle flash. So we get our weapon reference, and we get our weapon fired signal. You see the little signal icon, and then we're going to connect and get the function name without our parentheses. We don't want that. We just want the name of the callable, and then in this case, it's add muzzle flash. We're done, except for our particles. We need to create our particle system. But let's test our light first. So we'll comment out our emitter, and let's run this. I'm realizing I did not set what the light color should be or anything. All right, it's just white, but you can see it. So whenever we are firing our gun, we're getting a little bit of flash of light. Perfect. So our script is working. Let's position our light. We actually didn't do that step yet. So we have our muzzle flash node, and we have our Omni light, and we have our GPU particles. And what we want to do is just slide this in front of our gun right there, because the light's going to be emitting technically from that little hole right there. So you want it just kind of in front, and you're going to get some light flashing on the gun, and it's going to be out more. And when we do our GPU particles, you definitely want that to pop in front of that muzzle. So let's test that again. Looking good. And we can also change the color, make it a little bit warmer. I have to admit, I never liked the default color. Just give me the rectangle. All right, we'll get our kind of a warm orangey yellow. We'll check that. Now you can set those lights to anything you want. You can make it blue. Looking good. We can make it a little bit stronger. Maybe increase the range. You can play with this however you like to get the kind of look that you're going for. You even get the little reflection there, which is nice. All right, so lights and particle are in the proper spot. Next thing we need to do is create the particle system. Now, I mentioned earlier, I'm not a huge fan of how Godot is set up with the particle thing. It's a little clunky, but we're going to work through it. Stuff is kind of all over the place, so I'll try to go piece by piece. I might forget steps along the way, but we'll come back. I know what the settings should be. So, all right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to have a draw path. So we're going to go into our draw passes drop down right here, and to our first pass, we're going to create a mesh as our particle. We're going to use a quad mesh, which is basically a plane that's always going to face the camera. So it looks like it's a sprite that always is facing the camera. So we have our particle mesh. We're going to set this to a size of 0.05. So it's itty bitty. Tiny, tiny. Now nothing is showing up there yet, that's fine. Nothing is supposed to show up yet. And what we need to do now that we have our little quad, in fact, let's go ahead and create our material also. So we're going to do a standard 3D material, get that set up, and let's go to our process material. And this is where you're going to create a new particle process material, which is maybe not the greatest name for that. It's a little confusing. Once you set that, now you're going to have some particles dropping out. Every time you create a particle set up within this GPU particle node, you're going to have, they're just going to drop like flies. So we need to turn that off. We don't need gravity. So we'll go into accelerations. Gravity, there's our negative 9.8 per second. We're going to just zero that out. We don't need that. Now what we do need is a little bit of velocity. We don't want an acceleration. We just want an initial velocity when we spawn. So we go to our spawn, go to velocity, and we do a couple things within here. Right now, it's going X. And I think I need to remember to turn this, into local space because we're not in global space. We're all rotated. So we're going X, which is going to go down. We don't want to go down. So in fact, if I add a little bit of a velocity here, you can see we're moving down already. In fact, do we want it to move up? I think we should move it just up a little bit. Let's do -1 on the X. So we're going to have the particles move up, and we're going to set an initial velocity minimum as 0.5. In fact, it's kind of hard to see. Let me open that up a little bit. Initial velocity minimum, and let's do initial velocity max. All right, now we're getting a little bit of a floatiness to it, but we've got this issue of it's not following the camera. So let's go fix that. We'll go back into our GPU particle, and we're going to go to the material of our quad. Now, if you go open this up and go down to billboard and set this to particle billboard, that's going to face it towards the camera. So a little bit extra step, way off into the material, but that's okay. Currently, we're spawning these particles constantly. Now, what we want is to just have a little short burst, just like that, just like snapping of the finger. So close all this stuff. It gets a little cluttered. We're going to go to time, okay? You have a bunch of settings in here that are pretty nifty. And the first we want to do is set explosiveness all the way to 1. All right, now you can see they're all emitting at one time. You can adjust it to make it a little bit more random if you wanted to. The other thing we want to do is set the lifetime from 1 second to a lot shorter because it's just going to be a flash. Remember, we're only showing that light for 0.05 seconds. So let's set that to 0.1. Seems like a good lifetime. Actually, no, let's set that exactly. That's what we did for the light. Let's set it to the same. So now we're getting a very short lifetime. They're just kind of going up a little bit. And I'm not going to do this yet, but in the future, we're going to one-shot this. So they're just going to show up at one time. And then the emitter is going to turn off. Then whenever we fire the gun, we turn it back on. I'm going to keep this on, though, so we can see what we're working on. I don't want to have to go up there and click the checkbox every 2 seconds. We're getting there. We're getting there. There's a lot of little settings to set up with these particle systems. I think we have the general shape where we want it. Now, the next thing that we need to do is adjust the material. Okay, so we're going to go back into our draw paths. We're going to go to our quad and then down to our material and open that up. Now, the first thing we want to do is adjust the albedo. We want to create a texture for this flashing. Now, you can download something or create something within a image editor, and that's totally fine. I'm just going to use something within the editor. I'm going to do a gradient texture 2D. Okay. Now the standard gradient is not going to look great, but you do have some other options. So you go down to fill, you can do a radial, or you can do a square. And I kind of like the square. It's going to give you a little bit of the points on the corners. We just need to adjust a little bit of how this is all set up. So you can click those and move those around, or just go down to the from and set that right in the middle. Let's flip that with that button right there. And let's set this to our orange. I hate the default color thing. There we go. Just a little bit of an orange to match our lights. And you'll notice we still have this black outline. We can totally get rid of that. In fact, let's set this whole thing to orange. Maybe a little bit of a lighter orange on the outside, except we're going to turn our alpha down. Now, nothing's happening yet, but now that we've turned our alpha down, you notice that our image that we've created has that transparency. Let's go up to transparency and set it to alpha. And you're starting to get a little bit of a look. In fact, I'm actually not liking that light. Let's turn this back. Let's turn this back to black. All right, so we've got our alpha. And with your alpha, you can adjust your blend mode. What we're actually going to do is take that texture, pop it down to our emissive texture as well. So we have that same texture within our albedo. We've popped it down to our emission, and we're going to set that emission up quite a bit higher. All right, now we're getting a little bit of a glowy, a little bit of a fiery effect, and that's what we're looking for. And then we can also set the roughness down to 0. I think it gives a little bit of an extra shine, especially when we have our lights. All right, we're almost there. We're looking pretty good. When you're doing these particle things, you're always making these little tweaks to improve upon the look. I think one thing we're missing is, these are all coming out at the same angle. Now we can adjust that actually within our process material. So go back into our process material and let's go down to spawn and angle. Now we're going to add a little bit of a variation on our angle. Now you can see we're already getting a little bit of a better look. So just add somewhere between a negative and a positive. You can actively see how this looks when you're doing it to see if you're getting the effect you want. And already I think I'm pretty happy with that. Now if we do this on a one shot now, see we have our flash, pretty cool. And that's it. I think we're ready to test this out. So first thing, make sure your light starts off, or it's gonna be weird when you start your game. And then we're gonna go back into our muzzle flash script and we're gonna uncomment or go to line. We're gonna uncomment our emitter emitting equals true. Now, whenever we run this muzzle flash function, it's going to make the light visible. It's going to turn on our particle emitter. We're going to wait for the flash time, and then we're going to turn off our light. Let's test. Get over here to our dude. And there you go. You can see your muzzle flash is going. Maybe you make it a little bit bigger. Lots of settings that you can adjust within the particle system to change the look. You can add your own texture to make it really unique. But this is just a nice, easy, procedural way to create a muzzle flash in Godot 4. All right, guys, if this tutorial was helpful, consider a like and subscribe to the channel, as we're going to be covering a lot more. Thanks to all of my patrons who keep this series going. You too can get access to the project source files by joining my Patreon. You can download everything there, and you'll also get early access to my videos and sneak peeks at future tutorials. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep creating.